Hello, Mark Wright Larson here for the Dreamcatcher podcast. Thanks for joining us. Today, my guest is Rebekah George from Orlando. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. So how was everything in Orlando today?
Oh, not too bad. Just always hot, but doing
Okay,
my thing.
okay. So tell us a little bit about your background. I know we were talking earlier that you're originally from Indiana. So what took you to Florida?
Yes, I'm actually originally from Colorado, but I grew up most of my
Okay,
life in Indiana.
okay,
So yeah, I actually moved here from Indiana almost 3 years ago, as
okay.
I was trying to get out of an abusive relationship, and so I needed to get as far away from Indiana as possible. And I
Yeah.
knew my daughter's dad lived here, so I thought it would be good for her to be around her dad as well.
Right.
So it was kind of one of those things that worked out well for both of us. So I just, left and never looked back.
Yeah, I can see that, and I'm sure, especially in the winter, I know that Florida's got to be better than Indiana or
Oh, for
Colorado.
sure. Yes. And honestly, I didn't even realize I had seasonal depression because I was just always sad when the weather would turn. And now I come here and I'm
Me
like,
too.
it's just not, it's not existent.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I know I have that here in Nebraska. The day after day where it's cloudy and the short days, and very, very much. So, okay, you were in an abusive relationship, got out of that. So, what do you do today? What's your calling right now? Your journey?
Yeah, so I'm a mental health therapist and I have been for almost 15 years. But
Good.
what I do now, a lot more than mental health, is that I'm trying to really build my speaking career. So I'm trying to really share my story of really getting out of shame. So when I came here to Florida, I realized that I had a lot of baggage that I didn't
Okay.
that I didn't even know was there, that because I kept getting
Uh,
into the same relationships. I kept getting into abusive relationships. I kept attracting the same guy. And that's when I was like, maybe something's wrong with me. Maybe there needs to be something done
uh,
inside of me. And that's when I
uh-huh.
realized that I had all this baggage that I needed to unpack. So when that happened, so much of my life changed for the better that I was like, I want to help other people do the same process.
Awesome. That is so awesome. I mean and there's definitely a need for that. Like we were talking before the podcast, all the mentally challenged people where we were at last week in Louisiana, and pretty much anywhere you go.
Yeah.
And so how did you get started with this field?
With mental health,
Yeah.
yeah, so I just felt like it was a calling. Like I had some childhood trauma myself and I thought like what would I want to be to someone that maybe I never had myself. And
Okay.
so I just decided I was going to work with kids when I first got involved in the
Oh
mental
wow,
health
cool.
field. But I started working with kids right out of the gate and I didn't like it. It was not my calling. I was
Okay.
really sad a lot because I specialize in sexual trauma. And
Uh,
so working with kids who, had been sexually abused and things, it was just a
wow.
lot emotionally, especially because I had a little girl at the time. And so I
Oh,
stopped
yeah.
doing that and went into more adult work. But that was kind of my passion, was just to help people and to be what I really never had growing up.
Okay, very cool. So I mean that is so sad about especially kids having to go through that. Anything kids have to
Hmm.
go through. And
Absolutely.
I mean that just so you completely so you start with adults then and just basically work with them. So
Yeah. Yeah. So I do, I've done marriage counseling. I've done like regular, anxiety, depression. I've worked with, survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And then also I worked in a prison system for a while working with the offenders. And
oh
that was an
wow.
interesting experience. Yeah. So, I've done a little bit of everything.
I can't imagine. I mean, how was that in the prison system? I mean, that would be. I can't imagine that one.
It was rough. It was rough, but it did give me a new level of empathy for people and
I
understanding
bet.
where they came from. Not, condoning or saying it's okay, but understanding people a little bit better. And also, it became too much for me. I got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore because I started seeing every person as a predator. I started realizing that a lot of the predators don't look the way that we think they do. They're not all creepy old men in
Right,
vans. You
right,
know what I'm
right.
saying? A lot of them are like business owners and,
Wow.
attractive, charismatic guys. And, and of course there's women predators as well, but I worked with the men mostly. So it was, I just started thinking every person was a predator. And I realized that that was just not good for me mentally.
No, I just so and you okay you do that and I see and you said you're working on your public speaking career too.
Yes,
I
that's
mean,
what I'm trying to do.
so are you talking about this as your area of expertise when you're speaking?
Yeah, so I've spent the last few years studying shame and how shame affects us and how it holds us back. So shame really is tied to like limiting beliefs as well as imposter syndrome. And so really like getting to the bottom of what shame you have that you're carrying around, and how to eradicate it in order to live the life that you want to live. Because I started realizing that there was a lot of things connected to my shame and keeping me held back that I had no idea had anything to do with the shame that I had.
Yeah, I can relate with all that, and imposter syndrome definitely I can relate
Yes.
with. You just don't think you just feel like you're good enough to. It's just it's like nope, I can't be doing this. So
Right.
so okay, so how do people work with you then? I mean, do they do it in person or online or?
It's all online.
Okay.
I of course do speaking engagements, so I love talking to young girls about body image and shame and how shame can color our body image, right? So I really love doing that. I really love working with even older women who have
Okay.
struggled with their body image or with believing things about themselves that aren't true, right? But I also work one-on-one with people. I coach people, so I
Yep.
have a program that we have, it's like a 3-step program. We meet 3 times for 90 minutes and we dive into what is some of the shame that you're carrying around, and I have a step-by-step process of how to get out of it, and how to
Wow.
really do that. And then of course, if it's something that we need more than 3 sessions for, we can continue to work together for a while, but usually we just kind of dive in those 3 sessions, get it taken care of. I'm also working on a course that should be out here in the next few weeks of, if
Cool.
you don't want to work with me, you can also do it on your own, and just kind of go through the course if you decide that you don't want to do those individual sessions with me as well.
Okay. So how many people do you work at one time with? Do you have a certain amount that you just try and keep it so many people or?
I mean, it just depends. Like right now, I have several mental health therapy clients, and then I have some coaching clients as well. So it really just is whatever I can handle emotionally and mentally at the
Okay.
certain week. And of course, there's ebbs and flows. There's times where I'm like, oh, I'm a lot more busy, and other times where I'm not as
Yep.
busy. So it just depends. I obviously always take inventory emotionally and say, like, is this more than I can handle, or is this, can I have another client? So I try to be aware of that.
And I can understand that because I can see it could be emotionally draining,
Oh yeah,
certain
absolutely.
socially. So,
Yeah,
so how
it's
do you
very
deal with that?
rewarding.
What's that, Becca? I didn't
I
catch
said
that
it's
part.
very rewarding, but it is very draining.
Yeah. How do you keep yourself from getting pulled into that? I
It's a
mean,
great question. Yeah, so I really try to check in with myself emotionally, and also I know my limits. So I know that there are certain, just like what I said, hey, kids weren't for me. I realized that I can't work with kids who've been sexually abused because it was just too much of a trigger for me. It was too hard for me. There's certain like diagnoses that I don't work with when it comes to mental health. There's certain traumas that I'm just like, hey, this is not good for me, right? So I realize that, and I put that boundary up, and I say, hey, this is not, you're not my client. I have to help you find someone else.
okay,
I
that's
also
good.
try to, make sure I stay up on self care, right? Like I do
Right.
manicures, pedicures, like,
Yeah,
exercise, all of those
exactly.
things, as well as like positive self talk, friendship time, things like that.
Yeah, you can't pour from an empty cup or whatever. You need to definitely, yes, you
Exactly.
got to take care of you. That's for sure. Do you have a podcast yourself?
I don't know. I would love to start one someday, but right now I've got so many balls in the air that I can't do it.
We understand
Yeah.
that. So where do you see it going in the future? What's your
I
goal?
mean, I definitely would. I really just want to focus on the shame piece. And so I would love to, continue to share more about that, whether it's from stages or doing workshops or podcasts, things like that, of
Okay.
how people can overcome their shame. And trauma, previous trauma, and like really, I'm a faith-based coach, so I come from the perspective of Christianity, and so I also really
Awesome.
want to help kind of bridge the gap between church and mental health, that has kind of been just harmed in the past.
Yes, that's for sure. I agree on that. Um, so, um, okay. How do you see helping people like we were talking, like on the main street? Do you have any, how can we help as a nation help those people that are dealing with mental illness? Do you have any, I mean, I think as a society, we've kind of dropped the ball. What would be something that you might think would be a good direction on that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just like don't judge people so much. Like a lot of times people will come to me and they'll say like, I have not gone to therapy even though I knew I needed it for so long because
Uh-huh.
of the negative stigma that therapy, kind of has, which is crazy because honestly everyone can benefit from therapy.
Yep.
So really just like watching yourself and being like, am I judging here? Is this
Mm-hmm.
necessary?
Mm-hmm.
We all have problems, we all have issues, and some
Yep.
people know how to work through them and some people need extra tools to do
Okay.
so.
Okay.
So that's like a big piece of it. Same with like not stigmatizing medication. If you need depression medication, you need anxiety medication, you PTSD
Amen. Yeah.
medicine. Like those things are okay. Of course, there's a whole like thing with healthcare and it being affordable and all of that we could talk about, but that's kind of political. But I do think that there
Uh-huh.
also needs to be some access to those types of things, better access to mental health care for sure.
Yeah, I agree. So, okay, and going back to the shame, we talked about the other day. Explain to the audience what you mean by that. I mean, I really thought that was very interesting when we talked about that because
Yeah.
it's like, wow, I'm doing a lot more shame than I ever realized I was doing. So,
Right. Yeah. So a lot of times people think shame is like guilt, right? And so like when you
right,
explain guilt, guilt is I did something bad. I did something bad and I don't want to do it again. I don't want to feel that way. But shame is I am bad. So shame is really like internalizing something, thinking that something is inherently wrong with you and that you are bad or that you are broken or that something is wrong with you, right? And it doesn't necessarily
right.
have to be in some huge way like I'm flawed, and I'm terrible or something, but it can just be something small. Like you thought your life was going to look different than what it does now, right? So, like
Right.
I'm 37 and I don't own a home. Right now, I rent a home.
Okay.
And so, in that moment, like there has been times where as I rented this house, I didn't want to tell people I was renting a house because I thought at 37, I should own a home, right?
Okay.
And so
Right.
that actually is shame, where it's like, because society tells me I should own a home at 37, I've gotten to the point where like in my internal dialogue says you're not good enough because you don't own a home.
Yeah.
So it's those types of
Yep.
things where it's like, hey, I feel like society says I should do this. I should be skinny. I should be fit. I should
Right.
be, this way or
Exactly.
that way and whatever.
Yep.
And so it's that shame that comes up from that saying that there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. And that's such an interesting way to look at it because I never, until the other day when we were talking, I never thought of it that way. And there's so many things that society says either, you're supposed to do this by a certain time period. And it's just like, and I think that is one thing that keeps people, see what your opinion is, from catching their dreams. I think that maybe is why, I mean, maybe you have a different idea, but it's like, okay, I'm supposed to get a job and do all this other stuff, but I'm doing this dream catching stuff. It's like, well, I'm kind of, I better not do that, and because of being shamed because I'm not making enough money or I don't have this by now, and
Exactly. And
it's
sometimes we
just
have to grieve the loss of expectations. And that's what I tell my clients too. Like
okay,
we have an expectation of what we thought our life was supposed to look like. So for me, I'm divorced, right? I'm not
okay,
remarried. I'm not dating anyone. I'm single. And so that has not been what I thought my life would look like at 37,
hmm,
right? And so I've had to
right,
grieve the loss of that and recognize that because of my negative patterns, because of shame, I had been in bad relationships. And so that caused me to be in the place I'm in now. And I can heal and move forward, but I do have
okay.
to grieve the loss of my marriage. I have to grieve the loss of what I thought my life would look like at this point. So sometimes we have to grieve that and kind of radically accept it and realize that this is the reality of where we're at. And there's no point in holding on to what could have been. Let's just move forward.
Amen. That's an interesting way to put that too. I never thought about grieving that because it is because when you're getting out of school and the world's your whole life pretty much is in front of you. You have
Yeah.
all expectations, and I think most people don't go up to those expectations. I mean, life happens,
Right.
and that's an
I mean, at
interesting
least in
way.
one area, right? I mean, there's
Yeah,
always
right.
that is like, man, I thought that I would do better with my finances, or I thought I'd do better in my marriage, or my
Right.
kids, or, almost never does somebody say I hit every single target that I set for myself
Yeah.
because a lot of times we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves anyway. But then
True.
also, life just isn't as simple as we think it's going to be in our
Oh,
early 20s.
oh, there's times where it's like, gosh, why did I want to grow up?
Right, right.
It's
I want to
just,
go back to not paying bills and just like
oh,
enjoying childhood for
yeah.
sure.
And I think maybe you think that is where a lot of the I talk to so many people with anxiety. You think that the expectations is why they have so much anxiety that they
Absolutely. Yeah.
okay.
I mean, I think it's the expectations and also like overthinking, just overthinking of like what could go wrong, So like anxiety really is that looming fear of like what could possibly happen here, right? And a lot of it is
Right.
based in like, okay, things in the past have happened that I didn't see coming, but the other part of it is just like I know that I'm not in control. And that's really what it boils down to is I'm not in control and I recognize that and I think COVID showed us all how out of control we are.
Oh yes. Yes.
And saying that like really at the end of the day, we don't have a lot of control over almost anything in our lives. And so that's
No,
kind of
we
where that
don't.
anxiety comes from. And that's why
Yeah.
I always tell people challenge the fear of is this based in a fact or is this based in a fear? Because if it's based in a fear, why are we spending so much time thinking about it when we don't even know it's factual? Let's actually deal with the facts first and then we can go from there.
I love that. That is really I have to remember that myself. So because we don't and I mean how do you get over that though? Because I know some people that are in their 20s that are almost, um, it almost makes them so they can't do anything because of anxiety. How would they get over something like that? I
I
mean,
mean, of course, I think that like talking to a therapist as well as potential medication can help. But also just like continuing to challenge the negative thoughts, right? So, like cognitive behavioral therapy is really helpful because it is really addressing your cognitions or your thoughts and how they affect
okay,
your behaviors. But really like challenging that and saying, like, okay, I need to take a minute and think through this instead of just being on autopilot, right? So, a lot of times we will take something and run with it, an assumption that isn't even
right,
actually true. And then we spend
true,
80% of our time worrying about things that never actually happen. So
yeah,
it's really about challenging, like, do I know this to be true? And what do I know to be true here? And then I need to replace this with what I actually know to be true so that I'm not stressing about these other things. Also, building
awesome,
faith in yourself and recognizing, like, hey, okay, you know what? A lot of times the things that we think are going to be scary aren't nearly as scary as they are, And
amen.
so, like, trying to remember that and keeping track of our wins so we
Yep.
say like, okay, last time I did this, this worked out. So like maybe I can actually do this again.
And that's a great way to look at it because it is basically taking action. I have
Right.
people. It's like, well, I'm afraid. It's like, even at my age, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Of something new, and it never ends. It's just you just go kind of the old cliche, do it afraid or do it.
Do it afraid.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you have to do it. And I was actually before my wife's cancer in 2015. I was kind of on the other side of that. And if that didn't teach me to do it afraid, because we didn't know if she was going to live. She had advanced colon cancer, the huge bills coming in, $250,000. Didn't
Wow.
know any of this stuff, how it was ever going to come out.
Yeah.
And it actually, she made it. And it, like we both said, it was a gift because it pushed, what did it push us? And now I still, but people are just like, well, you don't seem like you're afraid at all. It's like, I would go with that.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you think that because let me tell you, or even doing the first podcast. I mean, the
Hmm.
first few were very intimidating to say the least. Uh,
Absolutely.
and I like to talk, but it's still, and I have people come on and it's like, we're talking beforehand and then I do the record and then it's just like, it's just recording. It's not live, but
Yeah.
there's something about that. And,
But I mean,
but yeah,
honestly, nothing good happens in our comfort zone.
no,
Everything that is good
amen.
happens outside our comfort zone. And it's
Yep.
true. It's like I just recently joined Brazilian Jiu Jitsu a few months ago.
Oh, wow.
And I had never done that a day in my life. And every time I go to, to participate in this, I tell myself, like, why am I doing this? But it's because I want to get out of my comfort zone and get
Yep.
strong. And every time, like, there's been times where I've learned so many life lessons in that.
Yep.
Because you're never like when you're learning something new, you're not an expert, and you have to just learn, and you have to be like, I'm going to be uncomfortable with being with we're comfortable being uncomfortable. And I
Yeah.
remember one of the times that I was frustrated, and my partner looked at me and he said, he's like, the sooner you get comfortable with being uncomfortable, the easier this is going to be. And that was
Yep.
really helpful for me to realize, like, you know what, that's true. Even in life, I have
It
to be
is.
okay with just being uncomfortable because that's where growth happens.
It is. It is definitely where growth happens, and just doing all the new stuff, doing the podcast, the cancer, whatever you're taking on as catching your dream. Because I tell
Mhm.
people it's like it's not easy, but it's worth it.
Absolutely.
But it will be, and it will challenge you to see if you really want to do this dream.
Yep.
And sometimes it's like, okay, enough, and it doesn't
Yeah.
care. It just keeps on putting the stuff toward, and but just think how much growth you get then. And for one thing, I think it maybe builds confidence. I do think it builds confidence that, okay, like you said, I've done this thing, so okay, I can do
I
that,
can do
this next
this.
step,
Hmm.
and just keep on going there.
Yeah.
But no,
Sometimes I
it's
even list out the hard things that I've done, right? So, when I left Indiana, I was leaving an abusive relationship, literally
uh,
with what I could fit in my car. Two
wow,
boxes and a suitcase, and that was it. And I had to restart my
that's
whole
not
life
much.
over. I did that, and like in the last 2.5 years, I've lost over 100 pounds. I've started a
Wow,
new business.
congratulations.
Thank you. I've started a new business. I've started a nonprofit organization for girls, teaching
Oh,
them,
wow, cool.
about their worth and their body image and who they are, and not comparing themselves to other people. So I've done a lot in these last few years, and so as I start to like write that out, I can see like, wow, if I can do this, I can do that, right? Like even though it's
Right,
hard,
right.
losing 100 pounds is hard.
Oh, yes.
And doing these things is hard. Leaving an abusive relationship is hard.
I
But
don't
I was
think
able
so.
to do it because I started to unpack and chisel away at that shame and realize that I'm worth it, and that's really what it comes down to.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and I find that too. Most people don't think they're worth it. It kind of goes back to imposter syndrome, but
Yep.
they just like you, and I don't understand that thinking, but it seems like that is most of the people some of the people surprise me that have that mindset. And
Yeah.
it's like, wow, I would never guess you have that, but everybody's worth it. I always tell my wife, it's like everybody wants to make a difference. Everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants to be important.
Yeah.
Even the people that well, like on the street. I would guess that they want to be important. They want to be heard. And it's just, you just got to take action. Like I said earlier, just start with the process. For one thing, that's how you learn how to do. I think we were talking the other day. You can't just become something. You have to become that person gradually, whatever that person you're becoming.
Yep.
Just like with what you're doing. It's a process. With the jiu-jitsu,
Yep.
that will be a process.
Yep.
The other day I did water yoga. That's definitely a process, and I'm a
I'm sure.
long ways from that. Let me tell you.
Yeah, yoga is
Uh,
no joke for sure.
oh, and doing it on water was
Hmm.
definitely crashed and burned a few times there. But for one thing, I think it becomes almost addictive when you start learning things too. It's just
Oh,
like, I want to learn more. I want to learn more,
yep.
and get the mindset as that. So this is so cool. So okay, your nonprofit. I want to talk a little bit more about that. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, so it is a Christian based, faith based thing. And it's
Okay.
basically about teaching girls, young girls, high school, college age, about their worth in Christ and realizing that, they don't need to find their worth in the world or what people say about them or,
Okay.
comparing themselves to Instagram models or any of those other things. But saying, like, hey, I'm beautiful because of who I am, and so it's really
Yes.
like, my goal eventually is to do seminars with girls where
Awesome.
they're really like interactive and eventually, hopefully, even weekend retreats or week long retreats if
Cool.
I can get the funding up to be able to really instill those things in these young girls so that they can take that and move forward with it in this Instagram culture.
That is so, I mean, talk about it's so needed because I
Hmm.
mean, all these people that look perfect on there, which aren't,
Yeah,
but they still, especially kids that compare themselves, well, and that just get more imposter syndrome because it's like, well,
right.
they're doing so much. It's just like, why would they even try?
Yeah, I
And
once heard somebody say, don't compare your behind the scenes to someone's highlight reel. And I love that because it's
yes,
like, yeah, we only see what people want us to see on social media. And it's the
we
beautiful,
do.
edited, airbrushed stuff that we get to see, not the, 25 pictures it took to get that and all
Exactly.
of the things,
Yes.
right? So, but you just look and you're like, well, my stomach's not flat like that, or I'm not tan like that, or, these types of things.
Yep.
And so these girls have these unrealistic expectations of what they're supposed to look like. And the pressure is insane.
It is. I can't even imagine. I'm actually glad I grew up before that really was a thing. I'm very glad. And I think that's one thing I also kind of makes me mad is they say this present generation is lazy and all this other stuff. And, they're dealing with a lot. And I find that they are not lazy. I
Yeah.
find they are awesome. I mean, what they are doing,
Hmm.
the stuff that they're starting and doing, I don't go for that. And,
Honestly, a
but
lot of the older generations think they're lazy because they're working smarter, right? So like
they are.
they are, making money on Instagram now. They're making money on Facebook. They're making money online. They don't settle for fast food jobs like we did,
Right.
or like my the
Right.
generation before me, right? And
Yep.
also, what's sad is a lot of times studies show that when you suffer, you want other people to suffer a lot of times too, and that's just not fair. It's like it's that belief, like
Interesting.
people who have paid off their student loans
Right.
are a lot of times upset about like potential student loan relief. Why? I had to pay off my student loans and suffer and eat ramen noodles for 15 years, so you should,
Right. Right.
right? Or,
Right.
like whatever that is. It's like, it's that feeling of I suffered and went through this, so should you. And that's really not fair. Like, if we can
It isn't.
allow our kids to grow up in a better world with these things and not have to suffer making $5 an hour working their butt off, why
Yeah.
not? Like, that's smart. But I
Amen.
think that people see that in the different perspective.
I think that's an interesting way to put it too. I never thought about that, but I do agree with that. That people, it's like, yeah, I had to do it; they need to do it too.
Yep.
And why wouldn't we want the best for people?
Exactly.
Another question: why do we always go as a society to negative? It seems like we always kind of go towards negative.
People are naturally bent towards the negative
Are
overall. Like
they?
that's just kind
Okay.
of how our brains are work. And honestly, I think it's because we are trying to protect ourselves. So limiting beliefs, imposter syndrome, keeping like thinking about the negative, those are all our brain's way of trying to protect us from disappointment. So it's kind of
Okay.
like if we sabotage ourselves first, or if we think about the worst case scenario, we won't be disappointed when we have hope, and then that hope is
True.
falls short, right? So hope is scary, and so a lot of times it's
True.
easier to not have hope. That's why you'll hear people be like going into a relationship, well, I don't have any actual hope for this, it's I'm just gonna like go for
Right.
it,
Right.
because they are afraid to have hope, right? Same with like a business. I've heard people start a business and be like, I don't expect this to do well, but here we go. And that's their
Yeah.
brain's way of saying, if I fail, I already knew I was gonna fail, so now I'm not gonna be as sad, right? It's like bracing yourself for the fall.
And that's too bad because words have power too. And
Absolutely.
and I just I can understand why they do that, but what you put out to the universe, I mean, and for one thing, I was reading a thing the other day, every cell in your body listens to what you're saying, every
Absolutely, it does. Yep.
and it's just like and I know people, well, I know this one gal who is overweight and she always kind of puts herself down before anybody else can.
Yep.
And
Hmm.
which is so sad. And she doesn't see hope of ever losing the weight.
Yep.
And she could do it. I mean, like you say, it is hard. It is
It
very
is
hard to
hard.
lose. Yeah, but it would be so worth it. I bet
Yeah.
you feel so much better. I
I
mean,
do. So I've lost 130 pounds since my biggest size. I
wow.
still have about 45 to 50 pounds to lose. This last weight has been a lot harder, and just like getting that last bit off. But it definitely is a much better life, and I'm able to do a lot more things. And also just realizing, like, if I could, I've been overweight my whole life. I was overweight since
Okay.
I was like 6 years old. So
Wow.
it's just always been my identity. And so for me, like challenging myself in that identity has been the biggest part of this,
I
realizing that I
bet.
don't have to be clumsy and overweight and, non-athletic. I can be whatever the heck I want to be. And so,
Amen. Yes.
so it's
Yes.
really like challenging that and saying like, I don't have to just accept this narrative of what I have accepted in the past.
Yeah, that is. So what was the impetus to finally get you to start losing the weight?
Honestly, it was realizing I started realizing that the weight that I was carrying around was actually a symptom of pain. And it was like this
Okay.
moment where, I feel like God showed me there is the weight you're carrying around. Like I looked at myself in the mirror and I stood there and looked for probably 45 minutes. And usually I avoided mirrors at all costs. Like I had my mirrors covered.
Okay.
I wouldn't go to stores that had mirrors. I hated the mirrors, 300 and
Wow.
something pounds. And
Okay.
so I hated it. And so I stood there and looked at myself in the mirror, forced myself to look, and I just saw the pain. Like instead of fat, I saw pain all over me. And that's when
Wow.
I realized I actually am like having a self-fulfilling prophecy of this is what I always thought that I was going to be. And it makes me feel safer to hate myself. And so I'm going to continue to do things that make me hate myself. And so when I started looking at it as this isn't like, fat that I have to get rid of, this is pain that I have to heal from. And then
Wow.
everything just shifted from that moment forward.
That is so awesome. I like that's a very interesting way to see that. I never thought of it that way. It does make sense. I mean, that just, and I'm glad you got to that point. I mean that. So did you? I mean, you don't have to. How did you lose the weight? I mean,
Really just healthy nutrition. I found a
really?
program that
Okay.
worked for me that was really
Cool.
good for their nutrition. And I recently started, exercising as well to try to tone up and lose this last 40 pounds. But really, I lost most of it I lost like 90 pounds in 9 months. So it was very,
Oh my
very
gosh.
quick. And it was a lot of like nutrition and mindset and like challenging myself and not. I stress eat, that's my thing. I've turned to food
Me
my whole
too.
life. And so I always used to make a joke and say, well, it's better than crack cocaine or something, but really it's not much better because it's still killing you in the end.
It is.
And so
Yes.
like I realized that anything that has power over me is not a good thing. And so
Yep.
I really had to challenge, and I still do every day have to challenge. I don't need to eat my feelings. I don't need to sit down and eat this
Yep.
tub of, ice cream. I need to go for a walk or whatever.
Right.
So it
Right.
really was changing my mindset as well as changing my nutrition.
Yeah, and it's a decision that you have to make over and over and over. I mean, it
Mhm.
is. So, okay, somebody that is got that mindset, how do you change your mindset? I mean, I'm sure you have to want to, but how? Like an mindset that would be so ingrained like that.
Yeah, and that's the thing is
How?
like really starting to reprogram your subconscious, right? So like reading books, like one of the books that really changed things for me was the new Psycho-Cybernetics, a really great
Okay.
book talking all about like subconscious.
Okay.
It's really studying how our subconscious has what it does and how it tries to protect us, and also
Okay.
like what our belief in ourselves is, right? So really starting to like, the thing is like our subconscious doesn't believe us whenever we say, you know, I had been dieting my whole life, right? So whenever I
Okay.
said I'm going to diet again, my subconscious was like, yeah, right. We've done this 2,500 times. We don't believe that. Why? Because I continued to fail because I wasn't keeping promises to myself. I'd keep promise to everybody else, but if I made a promise to myself, I would break it. So the
Okay.
first part of it is making little tiny steps that you can keep promises to yourself. So if you say my promise today is just to read a book that, you know, read a chapter of a book that's going to help me get to,
Right. Right.
then keep that promise no matter what. And that way your subconscious starts to say, oh, we actually do what we say we're going to do. So maybe the next hard thing that you start to do, we're going to believe you.
That's an awesome way to do it too. I never thought about that, and that does make sense because your subconscious would like, yeah, we haven't ever
Yeah, we've
been
never done
successful.
this, so we don't believe that.
So that's an interesting way to do that. I
Yeah.
like that a lot. That is so cool. So are you an author?
I am. I'm currently working on my book. It's almost done. I'm just getting it out in
Cool.
publication, so it should be out in the next few months. I'm going to start pre-releasing it here shortly. So I
Awesome.
am writing a book that is all about my journey out of shame, and it is a parallel to the prodigal son story in the Bible. But it is really about, you know, how I was able to crawl out of or be pulled out of the pit of shame, and how a lot of times it's
Okay.
just similar to quicksand that gets us, you know, drawn in,
Right. Right.
and really like getting out of that, and then also helping other people to get out of that.
No, that is. I mean, this is your first book.
Yes.
How was that to write a book? I would think that would be.
It was difficult because it really shows, it has a lot of vulnerability for me. Like I have to talk a lot
Yeah.
about like
Yeah.
childhood pain and a lot about things that, you know, I have to share things that I'm not super proud of and decisions that I made because of my hurt that I'm not super proud of. And so it was a lot of wrestling with how much do I share and how much do I not and how
I
vulnerable do I
bet.
get. And but the thing is that shame thrives in the dark. And so the more you bring it to the light, the less it grows, right? And so
Right.
you know, I really had to recognize like there isn't a whole lot that I don't need to bring to the light here. There's some things I don't need to trust with the internet, right? But like,
Right. 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 Yeah.
you know, I can bring these things and say, you know what, this is your problem if you don't like my level of vulnerability. That's not my problem. And so what I'm doing is even if I help one person in my vulnerability, then that is worth it to me.
It
So that
is.
was really
Yeah.
the hardest part of it was just really trying to figure out how vulnerable to be, how much to share, and those types of things. And also, there's other people involved in my story. So, also trying to be cognizant of not hurting them
Right.
and making
Right.
sure that I share what is appropriate, but also get the
Right.
point.
No. So do you have more books in you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to
Oh,
write
cool.
my next book. I've started actually already, which
Okay.
is a devotion book for girls. So it's a teen devotion about like the body image and things like that. So I'll probably do that next. And then I'm sure that I'll do many, many other books in the future. I have lots of books inside of me.
Oh, so awesome. I mean, that just, I mean, I don't know how many years ago, but would you think you would have ever gotten to the point you are today? I mean,
Not at all.
you've
No.
come so far.
A
I
few years
mean,
ago, I would have never believed any of this because I was stuck in a terrible relationship. I hated myself. I got to the point where I was so suicidal that
oh,
I had a plan of this is once my daughter turns 18, I'm going to kill myself, and that was my plan.
wow.
And so I actually had a plan of how I was going to do it. When I was going to do it, I started getting, you know, the finances together so that when I knew that if I did this, would she still get these finances and things like that? And
Right.
I was dead set on it. When she turns 18, that's it. And that's how hopeless I was, you know. And so
Oh, wow.
fast forward 2.5 years and see all the things that God has done in my life in this last
Wow.
few years. It's mind blowing.
It is. I mean, and I am so glad you didn't do that.
Me
I
too.
mean, so what was the turning point finally on that? Where you decided to
Really, it
want to
was
do
the
that?
first time I had hope. So it was, you know, for
Okay.
me, when I came here, the first few months I started dating again. It was really bad. I started getting bad in relationships again. And I was like, here we go. This is what I do. I mess everything up. You know, I had taken all these names for myself that were bad or clumsy and ugly and hideous and worthless and all of these things. And I
Mm-hmm.
was just like, this is another reassurance that like another reinforcement that I don't need to be here. And then there was a moment where I felt like God shared with me, like, you are mine and no one is going to take that away from you. And
Yep.
so that was when I realized, like, I have hope. And I even prayed and said, God, it's scary for me to have hope. You know, it's scary for
I
me.
bet.
Hope is terrifying right now because I've had hope in the past and I felt like it let me down. And so, really, that moment, that's when I started to realize, like, pain gives birth to purpose if you allow
Yeah.
it. Anytime you
Yes.
have a child, any woman who has a child knows that it's painful, but it's also such a beautiful process. And so that's when I
Yeah.
started to change my mindset around to how can I help other people, and how can I start to heal from this? And the more
Right.
that I
Right.
share about it, the more that it's that accountability to say I'm not going back to where I used to be.
Yes, yes, your backstory is amazing. I mean, and I'm so glad you're sharing it. And so you were, can people see you on stage speaking? Are there any
Yeah,
places
I mean,
local?
so if people want to, hire me to come speak, I would love to do that. So I'm
Okay,
at different, events. I don't have anything coming up in the next few months, but except some virtual things. I do virtual things a lot, but I
sure.
definitely love to, speak at seminars. I love to speak at even business things, like talking about how shame can hold you back from growing a business, and how previous trauma can help you to, to hold you back because of the limiting beliefs, right? So
Yes,
I feel like shame, limiting beliefs, and imposter syndrome can be spoken about across the board. So
yes, yes,
anything where
definitely.
that would be helpful, that's where I could speak.
Okay, very, very cool. So you're a busy person,
I
very busy
am.
person, which is
Yeah.
good. I think
Yeah.
this is so awesome. I'm so honored for you that you joined us today. So,
Thank you.
so what else? I mean, anything else you want to share with the audience today?
I think just like really looking internally and saying, what are the goals that I have set for myself that maybe I haven't, that I've fallen short on? Because so one thing I
Okay.
hear a lot of is people will say, like, I don't think I have shame because they don't know. They don't know that shame is what holds them back. Like, I had no idea that my weight was related to shame. I had always said, well, I've been overweight since I was a little kid. So, of course, it's
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
genetics, and part of it is
Right.
genetics, but I mean, I didn't understand that there was a connection, right? I didn't understand that one of the reasons I could never have a successful business was because I didn't believe in myself. I didn't understand that one of the reasons I never had a successful, relationship was because of this. And so a lot of times you don't understand that. And so really, if you're trying to figure out where your shame is, it's really looking at, like, first of all, is there anything that I wouldn't want to share with someone, or if somebody found
Okay.
out about me that maybe I would be embarrassed or feel like they wouldn't love me? That's usually shame. And then the second thing is, is there some kind of limiting belief somewhere where you say, I don't believe that I deserve this, or I've set a goal for myself in this particular, area, and
Right. Right.
every time I fall short, usually there's some kind of shame there that we can work on.
Which makes sense too. So, I mean, that just so awesome. I mean, you are doing so much good, and you're talk about ripple. Everything you're doing is gonna all the positivity going out to the world with your books, your speaking,
That's my
doing
hope.
everything. I mean, that just and your daughter. How old is your daughter, if I may ask?
She's 13.
So, what does she think of all this you're doing?
I think it's been interesting for her as she started to see how much I've changed. And really, like, one of the things that has happened is I've gone from a very passive person to starting to have a little bit of a voice. And that's been a
Okay,
really hard thing for me because I am very chill and very passive. I don't get angry. I'm just kind of a chill person.
just kind of
A lot of
okay.
times that causes me to be walked on. And it's because I don't always see that my needs are as important as other people's, or that my voice is valued. And so she has started to notice, she'll say things like, wow, mom, you actually stood up for that. You would have never done that before,
That's
or she'll
awesome.
say, like, wow, I think you're really changing. That's something different, and so she notices those things, and that's one of the big
Very
reasons
awesome.
that I want to change that,
Yeah.
is because I
Yep.
want her to see that, positive role model
Yes.
in me.
Yeah, that is so cool. I mean, and especially getting into the teen years. I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, that's when you, and that is very, that's, do you think she would want to do something like that? I mean, does she help you?
Sometimes she'll help me with, like, social media stuff, but for the most part, or I'll say, like, hey, what does 13-year-olds like deal with right now? If I'm talking about, like, kids or whatever, she'll tell
Right.
me that stuff. But for the most part, she's a typical 13-year-old where she's like, I don't know, she
Yeah,
doesn't want to have these conversations. But I do
especially,
think that she is proud of me deep down, and
I think
so
so too.
one of the things I have people do a lot, like a exercise I have people do with their teenagers and with themselves, is getting those little stickers that say, hi, my name is. And I
Right?
have them write out all of the negative things that people have said about them, and all the things that they have said about themselves, all the names that they've
Right.
accepted, put them all over their body, look at themselves in the mirror and challenge that, and start to take each one
Wow.
and rip it apart, and then put new names on yourself. because that was so
Nice.
powerful for me to realize some of the names I had accepted. I really had accepted that I was always going to be picked last in athletics, that I was not athletic. But now that I started doing boxing and BJJ, I started realizing I could be athletic. I just didn't trust myself and realize that I could, right?
Yep.
I
Yep.
used to think I was clumsy, but when I saw an eye doctor recently, and he said, for the first time, he said, at 37 years old, I found out that I have an eye disease that causes me to have trouble seeing depth perception, right? So that's why I
Wow.
broke bones a lot growing up in
Oh,
school,
wow.
because I couldn't see, like when I'd step off of a curb, I would fall.
Right.
I've broken my ankle multiple times, my fingers, my thumb, my arm, my
Oh,
leg. I mean, all
wow.
of these bones, because I just can't see how far things are away. But no
Yeah,
one
that
ever
would.
tested me for this because it's pretty rare, and so I didn't recognize that. And so when he told me that in the office recently, I just started weeping, and
I
I
can
was
understand
like,
that.
I am not clumsy. I just have this issue that I have to overcome, right? And I have to be
Mhm.
aware of it. And so that was a huge thing for me. But what names are you
Yes.
accepting that are not even true about you?
Yeah. True. And that is, I've never heard of that, but I would definitely make it hard for you to do things. But
Yeah.
I'm so glad that it is things that we accept that aren't true of you. And for some reason, people, especially certain people, have power over you. Whatever they say, especially growing up,
Yes.
you believe.
Yep.
And it is very hard to get over that.
Mm-hmm.
Even at my age, I still remember those things that people said to me. So, because I was in the same boat, I was not athletic, picked last,
Yeah.
and I've kind of come in the same. In the last 2 years, I've learned how to swim, doing all this other stuff
That's
at the
awesome.
Y, and it's just like I am athletic, and I actually like it very much.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can
So
be whatever you want to be. Like you can
you
change. You may
can.
have to work harder than a person who's naturally athletic or
Yep.
something,
Yep.
but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. And
Yep. Amen.
realizing that like I deserve to do the things that I want to do. We have one life and that's it. And we got to make it
Yes,
count. And so
we
we
do.
can't just accept those negative things because then we're not going to step into our purpose.
We're not. No, and everybody, and I get people that say someday. It's like, no, now. This is all you have is
Now.
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 And some days don't usually occur.
Yeah.
So, and then it's never too late. I
Yeah.
mean, just like with us in the athletics, it is never too late.
Yep.
Because people look at my age, it's like, why are you doing this now? It's like, why
Why
not?
not? Yep.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. I mean, I have clients who are in their 50s and 60s and they're like, thriving and doing great. And honestly, I had a moment the other day on a podcast where a guy asked me, "What age do you want to die?" And I was like,
oh
I don't know,
wow,
I've never thought of that. And he said, "Well,
huh,
what age if you could just, choose an age?" And I said, "Well,
right,
if I could keep all my faculties and do well and still be healthy, I probably
yep,
would say 95." And he's
yep,
like, "Okay, if you're 95 and I'm just over 35 now." He's like, that means you have 60 years left of life." And it like blew my mind to think about the fact that like I could potentially live another 60 years, right? And
right,
so like, wow, I still have so much that I can do on this earth, which of course we're not promised tomorrow. I don't
true,
know.
true,
But
right, right,
it was really eye-opening for me because sometimes I get stuck in this mindset of like I'm too old to make it, even just in my mid 30s, like I'm not as young as I
yep,
used to be. I can't like have more children, and even though I believe I can, all of those types of things that you have to really challenge and say like,
you do.
hey, there's a whole life ahead of me, and until the day you stop breathing, you have purpose.
You do, yes. I mean, and that was a great question. I like that question a lot. I
Yeah, it
could see
was
that.
really it rocked me.
Because I would never have ever thought of that, and I
Hmm.
would be with you if you can keep your faculties and everything.
Yeah.
Just keep on going. I mean, the other day I was watching a video with I think the gal was 106 and still running track and all this other
Wow.
thing, and talk about inspirational. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just you just keep going. Just
Yeah.
forget your age. If
Yeah.
you're feeling, I mean, if you don't feel well, it can be a little more difficult. But if you feel well, just keep going and just do whatever
Yeah.
you want to do. And and there's no limit. You can do
Yeah,
whatever you
and
want.
do what you can do. So, like, I mean,
Yep.
obviously, if you're 500 pounds, you probably can't do the same workout as a 140-pound person.
Right.
But
Right.
you can get out there and make sure that you take 1,000 steps today, and then tomorrow you
Yes.
can take 1,010. And
Yep.
so like sometimes you have to be where you're at, and that's it. And
Yep.
that's hard to do. Like sometimes I'll go to class and I'll be like, I want to do what the black belts do, but like I'm
Right.
not a
Right.
black belt. I haven't put that work in yet. And so I
Right.
have to recognize that even as a 200-pound person, I can't do necessarily what the girl who's 120 pounds can do. And
True.
so I have to recognize that, like, there's those things that it's okay that it's going to take me a little bit longer to get there because I look back at when I was 330 pounds and it's a whole
Right.
different
Right.
world, right? And so like
Yep.
seeing how far you come and not comparing yourself to those people who maybe have put a lot of effort or time into it already.
True. And we have a tendency to do that, that's for sure. So,
Hmm.
and yeah, you have to see where you came from and all you've accomplished. I
Yeah.
mean, that is so awesome. I mean, uh, well, Becca, I'm gonna end if unless you have something else. Um, and we'll put in the show notes where people can get a hold of you and
Yeah.
everything. And I would love to have you on a follow-up podcast sometime down the line if you'd be open to that.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
So,
And I would love people to reach out. So in the links where you put the stuff to
okay,
find me, I would love to get connected to people. Love
very
to. I just
cool.
love talking to people and hearing their stories.
Very cool. So, well, thank you for joining us today on the Dream Catcher podcast. Look forward to talking to you again. We'll put all that in the show notes so everybody can get a hold of you. And thank you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.